I'm going to try to sync the slides to my presentation, since many of you may not have seen the actual slides as I was giving my talk.
This research is Mr. Kern's research, and this is not from anyone else on the board, it's specifically from him.
Yes.
Correct. I want all the credit. And the accountability. Yeah, I certainly appreciate it. That's why I put big and bold. It's a compendium of research of things that I've done over, as I think Dr. Harner mentioned, or no, one of the Mr. O'Donnell mentioned that I made a pitch last summer in July, I think it was. Brian, how should we just coordinate next? So, to start off, I want to really stress, and a few of you have stressed this, we're in this together. It's not us versus them. It's families, children, staff. We really need to respect each other. No bullying, no ostracizing on either side. And I think it's really important to have an overabundance of actually respecting that other people have different perspectives. And it's really one of the easiest things to do is just have an I and a me perspective. And sometimes as you grow, you get a we. Like children are classically I. And hopefully as we grow as adults, we get more we. But even stepping beyond that is a broader perspective that's sometimes hard to do. Just happened to look today at the latest counts. They're still staying low, and I don't know if that little drop down on bucks is the top of the summer curve. You can see, the curves kind of come and go. But you can also see the lack of correlation between cases and the actual Bucks County deaths, which are pretty low right now. So it's just putting that out there in the beginning. And yeah, let's face this right up. Last year I thought we did a real good job compromising, from a lot of perspectives. I didn't get what I wanted. Not everybody got what they wanted, but we compromised. And this year we've got some things to consider as a community. Certainly the masking is, as you know, the current plan is optional for folks to make their own choices. But the biggest difference is the county, and we got data. Like Nancy Ann would get data from the county. We had tracking because it was a trust but verify. None of us should be so egotistical to think we know the answer of what the future is going to be. That's just impossible. So the trust but verify, it's certainly a claim that I still want. But how do we do that if the county's not giving us data right now? So no doubt there's some things that we have to figure out. And the distancing, certainly I'm sure many teachers might want to go back to some better educational opportunities in their classrooms. And I think, again, having that flexibility and freedom is important, and do things that are more practical. And of course, I assume we're going to still encourage hand washing, all that good stuff. My wife said, she's in healthcare. She always knows the power of just wash your hands. And other things that Rob and company will still maintain, I'm sure, in terms of HVAC filtering and things like that. The quarantine is different. We're not forcing kids home. Like I think one of the speakers mentioned we did things last year without really knowing, although we actually did have a lot of data that I provided from Europe because they're ahead of us. They're still ahead of us. But the United States seemed to need to learn on our own that a lot of things are actually way safer than we expected. But the aspects about quarantine are not going to be like last year. It's going to be more like the kids, the parents got the flu, got the COVID, and self-imposed. I believe last year kids probably lost out on educational days through quarantine because I think it was probably too drastic, too much, too long, and with people with no symptoms, just contact tracing. So anyway, we learned a lot. And the monitoring, how are we going to do that? How can we build some kind of signal that we had last time? I think we still need to consider what can we do. I have some ideas on that later. But yeah, these are my views and some data. We'll go fast through these. Just like last year, I'm an aerospace engineer by training. I work with a lot of software teams. It's risk mitigation is what we do, and it's treating things as a holistic. And, it's a system. It's not just some single profile. Not everyone in this room. There might be two of the same birth dates, but there's probably not necessarily the same risk profile to everybody. And it's important to recognize that. This is the hardest thing. This, I don't know how you get past, some of the very logical, explainable fear. But I'm not so sure that's how we should run a school district. That's not hot, and that's not how I think about this. To try to separate out the fear from trying to make logical decisions. So it turns to data, and you're right, there's all kinds of information out there and a lot of misinformation, and sometimes even from our public health experts, sadly. So I instead look at multiple sources, including the CDC and actual data, and use some critical thinking and try to get a different perspective. And from that, I think it's really important to care about the kids' well-being and their safety and their learning, in addition to the teachers and staff safety as well, and then the family, right? It's not a singular issue. It's not a singular track that we need to look at. So to me, there's a lot more than just solving COVID, because there's side effects. And I think having the parents' right to choose, the teachers' ability to have some freedom, is putting power back into the folks that are closest to the actual situation. So for me, giving the parents the freedom and autonomy to exercise their right is an important aspect. And I think it's, you've seen just the small sampling we have here. Not everybody has the same circumstance, and they're all valid. Like, none of them are wrong. And they shouldn't, and none of them should just be cast out because it's not your certain circumstance. The speech is a great one. So, looking at some of the risks, think about, when was the last time you were ever exposed to this kind of information? Like, never. Never in our lives were we given this non-stop onslaught of 18 months of data after data after data about something we know nothing about. Unless you're an epidemiologist, unless you study all-cause mortalities over the decades, unless you are in this business, how do you expect the average person to take this all in and not be fearful, frankly? If they did this by the way, 2020, COVID was the third leading cause of deaths. You know what the first and second were? Yeah? Heart disease and cancer by a mile.
Thanks to the insurance agent over there.
Oh, no, then I should have disqualified him for answering. But the point is, imagine if they plastered that day in and day out. Well, maybe we'd do better about a lot of things, or it might be a good idea. But nonetheless, my point is purely, we're not used to these numbers. We're not, nobody sees these kind of numbers day in and day out. And the Delta variant is the next blast, of information. And oh, by the way, viruses mutate. Like, they're not evil. They don't have a brain. They're not, I'm going to go get these people. Let me go get all these old people with comorbidities in northern Italy. And start this whole thing off. No, they're just trying to survive. They don't want to kill their host, because then they die. So this is how viruses evolve, and especially with the vaccine targeting only the single spike protein. You can imagine all the people who have immunity, and we should also not just think vaccine, non-vaccine. It's immune, non-immune. Like, let's stop stigmatizing, because there's a bazillion people that have way better immunity, like Israel data shows 6.7 times better immunity by natural COVID than the single spike protein mRNA, which we're already proving Delta got around it, right? So it's important not to stigmatize vaccinated versus, it's rather immunized versus, natural immunity or not immune. The case fatality rate, on the other hand, is 96% lower for Delta than Alpha. And this is through, I have all the data, so from huge studies. Again, England's really far ahead of us, so there's real data with millions of people. So case count is interesting, but it's not the full story. Matter of fact, it's hardly the story at all. And here's another example of looking at how we've come from one year, 2020 to 2021, in terms of the mortality. So yes, Delta is way bigger. However, the mortality is not. And I already showed this. And this is another point to Mr. O'Donnell's point about stats are really hard to know. Like, our brains aren't wired for some of this stuff. You think lightning strike is like really rare. Well, it's not nearly as rare as dying from COVID. The deaths are all tragic, but the first number, 1.5 million, comes from a study of, and this is where they looked at actual deaths for every child in the UK. And the second one is 3 out of 7 million deaths of England and Wales, slightly different age. But both of those are shockingly small numbers versus opioid overdose. I'm sure Beth Ziegler can talk about things like that. Motor vehicle crash, 1 in 107. So understanding numbers is also, hard. There's some risk of death up there for you. And this is now, while COVID was third last year, it's seventh right now. That little pink thing. So kids, families, and teachers. As I said, that unfortunately the United States felt no obligation to study the 350 child deaths, to look in detail. Like, did any healthy children die? We don't even know. Sadly, right? We have no idea. Versus UK, they looked at all the child deaths and prosecuted each one to find out, oh, here's some real deaths. The others were, they died with COVID, not from COVID. We know nothing, and I don't know why, but there's absolutely no data that says, have any healthy children died from COVID in the United States? And the experience, in other countries, Sweden, for example, no COVID deaths, almost 2 million school-age kids, no problems. And Iceland has a really fascinating study that actually tracked every genetic aspect of, the transmission actually through families and whatnot. However, to Mrs. Ziegler's point, this is not slammed all over the news media. All of the system's holistic. If you just treat one thing only, what aren't you doing? So in this case, children's mental health deteriorated dramatically. All kinds of emotional and behavioral issues. There was it's sad to say that in the Northeast, the rest of the United States wasn't as bad, but in the Northeast, which I guess we're part of, the intentional self-harm increased 334%, as well as overdoses, drug abuse, all kinds of things that don't get the big marquee lights, but are serious problems for kids. Not to mention developmental problems with masks and facial recognition and all that kind of stuff. And then, the CDC, this was in December. There was no outbreaks. That wasn't like massive outbreaks from going back to school. The Iceland study, not a single instance of a child infecting parents, right? So there's, or the teachers also, I think I have another slide here about the safety to teachers. They often are less likely to get infected because of the cohort and the fact that you're actually in a fairly consistent environment compared to people milling about in general society. So, it's interesting to understand that sometimes having that sort of consistency, and by the way, there are even schools here that went completely maskless last year and had no issues with COVID. So it's not a slam dunk, and I won't get into do masks work or not, but just know that the virion, the size of the aerosol of COVID, it's like buckshot through a chain link fence compared to your mask. Just FYI, it's now sure if someone's sneezing and splashing on you, absolutely the mask stop that gush, but you should look up some of the details of these these things are small. They're really, really, really tiny. They're not giant. So the problem is we have less than perfect choices here. I wish we had data coming in like we did last year. And I don't know, as a team, maybe as a community, we can figure something out. I have some ideas about some crowdsourcing things that maybe we could do something crazy. But evidently, I think Mr. Spears told me that, you know, from the county, they were stopping to get cooperation about contact tracing. So what do? They're not telling us. They used to give us data. So if we don't get data, then we need to I think we're still trying to maybe work that angle to see what the county's going to do. But at the moment, the best I have is the stuff we get online. And that's not very timely. I mean, it actually probably is, but it's the whole county. It's not near us. So, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. You know, what can we do? I'm not sure, but we should potentially consider some ideas, because there might be ways to, especially with the younger kids, if you know, because they stay all together. And that's an easy cohort. But, you know, maybe there's some opportunity to study some ideas, and I think we should still keep talking about it. So in summary, I think we need to balance the needs of many. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not any one side. We have to support all. And I think the optional masking allows everybody to choose. So it, to me, is the most equal, because everybody gets to decide what's right for them. I don't want to decide what's right for you. I always say, you know, yeah, dictatorships are great if I'm the one in charge. Yeah, but we're not. And kids and teachers are safer even in schools with no masking. And I think as a group, we just need to practice vigilance from the classroom to the buildings to the whole district. You know, just be in this together. And for me, approving the plan is just the start. It's not the end. Just like last year, we will revisit it all the time. We will constantly stay on top of things. We did this last year. We pivoted when we needed to. So to me, this is a start and not the final message. So thank you very much. Thank you, Madam President.